It's a grant covering an IEHS Core Center of Excellence. Okay, and this grant has been in operation here at the University of Rochester since 1975. And so it'll go into the 40th year of operation under this grant. And the grant contains 47 people from 13 different basic science and clinical departments in a medical center. So it's not just the people in this particular department of environmental medicine, but we have our fingers in lots of other clinical and basic science departments across the medical center. So it's a huge multidisciplinary grant to look at the effects of environmental agents in terms of human disease. This grant will enable us, obviously, to continue some of the work that's ongoing in terms of looking at things like bisphenol A and phthalates in plastics, and effects of mercury in fish, effects of work of dioxins, and for example, other agents, pulmonary nanoparticles in the air from Dr. Oberdosser's lab, effects on inhalation, whether exposure to kids, for example, very young, results in asthma later on in life. So it covers a huge base of effects of environmental agents, not that will specifically cause toxicity or in itself, but again as cofactors that may react with other things like genetics and epigenetic effects that people may see later on in life. And we're particularly interested in very subtle effects like behavioral effects, effects on neurodegenerative diseases that may develop later on in life, effects in lung in terms of asthma development. So it covers lots of different things, and it enables us to really continue the work into the future and start looking at new things like stem cell effects, epigenetics, development, like I said, in terms of nanoparticles. What are the effects of nanoparticles, as these are particles that are used in industry applications, and also development of nanoparticles for therapeutic uses. But there's always some side effects of these things that people don't really think about, and allows us to look at those particular side effects that may happen in people. Some of the new areas we're looking into is epigenetic effects, things that are not regulated by genetics, but may have long-lasting effects if exposure occurs during fetal stages, for example, or developing stages. We're also starting new areas in terms of stem cell effects. As stem cells develop in a fetus, or even adult stem cells like hematopoietic stem cells, these are being recognized now as very sensitive targets of particular agents that people have not really realized before. And some of the developmental effects that we've seen in the past maybe because the stem cells are being affected. The other areas that I just mentioned would be nanoparticles. We're continuing to work on nanoparticles and extending that work into therapeutic uses of nanoparticles. It started off on the mercury studies, but you should know that, and you may know, that these studies are continuing. There's a huge cohort study going on in the Seychelles Islands, and they found that they were looking at effects of mercury at low levels of consumption in fish. These people eat a lot of fish. But they've realized, and in fact, some of the things that are in fish actually protect against the mercury. So there's nutritional aspects of this going on that are going to continue. These are new aspects in terms of the mercury studies, and they found out what's in the fish in terms of nutritional aspects that really protect these people from mercury toxicity. And so there's a whole new area of nutritional toxicology that's being opened up, and again, in terms of interactions of cofactors and genetics and disease and nutrition that really have to be explored. And one of the things we're very reluctant to say, you can't eat fish because of the mercury content. In fact, there's so many benefits in terms of brain development and tissue development and fish consumption that are essential for people's health. And so you have to balance the mercury content in the fish with the fish consumption, and finding actually what levels of mercury will be toxic in terms of what content of nutritional aspects of the fish. Those numbers are very fuzzy, and so one of the things that is very important in the future is defining those numbers. How much fish can you eat, and what's the content of the fish in terms of PCBs and mercury content that is safe and actually beneficial versus the content of mercury. We've been working on the toxicity of dioxins and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons for a long period of time. And we had a student a few years ago where we started looking at making some antagonists to protect against these chemicals. And I had a student in the laboratory who was interested in natural products, and he says, Dr. Gasiewicz, I was doing some reading, and what seems to be in green tea seems to be doing opposite of what dioxin seems to be doing. So we went down to Wegmans, bought some green tea, boiled it up like you would make green tea, and we put it in one of our assays, and lo and behold, whatever was in green tea totally protected it against the toxicity of dioxin. And so it was one of my students' thesis actually to find out what was in green tea that protected and determine the mechanism. We actually have launched another study on green tea constituents that seems to be protective against cancer. So we think we may have found out the mechanism whereby actually those green tea constituents actually protected against certain types of tumors through the prostate cancer, mammary gland cancer, and so on. So it launches to a whole different type of study that we would never have expected. Green tea does something we never thought it did. I'm actually buying some molecule called HSP90, which, by the way, the National Cancer Institute has been looking at a long time as a target for anti-cancer agents. And so we've actually identified the site on this particular molecule that the green tea constituents actually bind to, mapping the site. We're looking at different structures of the green tea constituents to find out more potent molecules, and then we're about to test this in a prostate cancer model developed here at the University of Rochester. There's two sides of this story, both in terms of recognition here in the medical center, and I think that's the case because more and more people recognize that these environmental agents act as cofactors for disease. And so we've come, as I said before, we've stretched out our fingers to many different departments and clinical aspects of the medical center, and because of that, people are beginning to interact with us more. And then across the country, again, as you said, people are becoming to realize there are things like in plastics and things that we drink are having very subtle effects upon child development, our behavior, sexual development, reproductive development, that are very clearly due to some of these compounds in the plastics that we use and we utilize for foods and drinking and so on and so forth. So the recognition is there that environmental health science is a very, very important aspect in our health. I'm under the belief, and most of our faculty are under the belief, that the basic premise of toxicology is dose makes the poison, and that there's a certain dose our body can deal with quite effectively. Okay, but why expose yourself to something that you don't have to be exposed to in terms of a toxic chemical? So I'm actually very careful. I do drink green tea. I'm not a coffee drinker. I watch what I eat in terms of using plastics and not microwaving plastics with food, for example. When you could do things safely and more safely, why not do those things? It just makes sense to me. Sometimes you don't know where some things are going to go. We've been working a long time on the toxicity of dioxins, and this led us down a road to looking at bone marrow stem cell populations. There's a paper coming out by another group, and I can't say which one that is, but they've actually used some of our data to develop compounds that will expand human bone marrow stem cells in culture, and then use these expanded bone marrow stem cells for bone marrow transplants. So it's a human application for human disease from some of the basic science that we do. And I was particularly excited about hearing about the work by the other group. That's one place we were going to go, and I'm glad somebody did it finally. But that's just an example of the things that we all run into in terms of the people at our center, and focusing on the basic science and not knowing sometimes where those things will be leading in terms of human health applications. We all want these things to lead towards effects upon public health, okay, but sometimes you just don't know where it's going to go. And it's gratifying to see those things happen.